After an embarrassing loss to end the season and a change at quarterback, can the Indianapolis Colts make it back to the top of the AFC South? Tune in to find out. What is going on, everyone? It is Connor, the co-host with the most, back with another Clutch Crew Sports 2022 NFL team preview, this time looking at the Zach and Eric's favorite team, the Indianapolis Colts. That was a joke, by the way. It's not their favorite team. It's one of their least favorite teams. They are Jaguars fans. But, yeah, we're going to be taking a look at the Indianapolis Colts. This is a team that, they barely missed out on the playoffs last year. They could have gotten into the playoffs had they just beaten the Jaguars at the end of the year. Which is always easier said than done for them when they play in Jacksonville. So they're definitely looking to rebound, especially given that, the AFC South is going to be theirs for the taking this year, in my mind. They're going to have to fight with the Titans, but they definitely have a chance, no doubt. So let's get right into it here with the Colts. And the big storyline, of course, for the Colts is going to be the fact that they've had 3 quarterbacks now in 3 seasons. They had Phillip Rivers in 2020. They were able to squeak into the playoffs at the end of the year. They lost a really close wild card game to the Bills. And then, of course, last year they had Carson Wentz, which ended up a bit more disastrous. Like I said, they had that embarrassing loss to the Jaguars at the end of the year last season that made them miss the playoffs. And they're continuing their trend of just bringing in veteran quarterbacks ever since the departure of Andrew Luck. And this time around, it's going to be Matt Ryan, who, in my mind, of course, is definitely an upgrade over Carson Wentz. Wentz is, I've actually talked about Carson Wentz already. I did the preview for the Washington Commanders, so Matt Ryan's definitely an upgrade in my opinion. It's definitely going to be interesting to watch him, though, just because, I've always kind of held the opinion that I don't think that Matt Ryan was the reason why the Falcons would do as bad as they had. He's definitely not anywhere near the, form that he was in when he won the MVP award back in 2016, and he's definitely a bit inconsistent, but I think he'll be able to do a bit better on this Colts team. He's got a better offensive line in front of him. He's got a better run game. The only problem for him is something he does. There's a problem on this offense, which we'll get into here in a second, but it'll definitely be interesting to see how he does. If I had to rank the quarterbacks in the AFC South, I'd probably hesitantly call him the best. I definitely think, he's obviously better than Davis Mills. Until Trevor Lawrence proves otherwise, I'd say he's better than Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence definitely has the ability to pass him this season or next season, but right now I think Ryan's still the better quarterback. And I do think he's a better quarterback than Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill started to regress a lot last year. So it's definitely going to be interesting to watch him and see how he does in a new offense and a new system. His head coach is a former quarterback himself, so, quarterbacks like, having other quarterbacks around to be their coaches and their, the ones that are leading them. So definitely be interesting to watch with Matt Ryan. So I mentioned that there was a problem with the offense, and the problem with the offense is definitely going to be who's catching the ball from Matt Ryan, because, Jonathan Taylor is one of the top running backs in the league right now. It's debatable between him and Derrick Henry right now who's the best. I would maintain that until Henry starts to show regression, that Henry's still the best, but Taylor is at least second, if not first. I know he's going to be going number 1 overall in a lot of fantasy drafts this year too. But just who's going to catch the ball? You brought in this new quarterback, you brought in Matt Ryan. Even if you want him to be, maybe a more of a form of a game manager per se, you're not expecting him to be this elite quarterback or anything. You still need receivers to catch the ball. T.Y. Hilton's gone now, which, he had kind of been a shell of his former self, so that's not really a huge loss for the Colts. They don't have Jack Doyle anymore at tight end. And so, really the only receiving threat on this team last year was Michael Pittman. He did cross the 1,000-yard mark, but, in my mind, in such a high pass-heavy league, and especially now that there's 17 games, 1,000 yards, he just barely got over 1,000 yards too. It's obviously still impressive, no doubt about that, but, when you have these other receivers that are getting 1,400, 1,500, Cooper Kupp even got close to 1,900 last year, just barely getting over 1,000 yards is not going to cut it anymore to be considered an elite receiver, in my mind. So, he's definitely good, and he should continue to improve, but he's the only real receiving threat on this team. They do have a couple, the other top two options on their team, Paris Campbell, he's been hurt a lot. He hasn't played a whole lot of games for them. There was a lot of anticipation around him. He really didn't play in that many games last year, so the question is going to be if he's going to really take that next step and, really evolve into a true, number 2 receiver next to Pittman. Because if he doesn't, then Pittman's just going to be drawing double teams, and it's going to be a nightmare for Matt Ryan. Their starting tight end now is Mo Alley-Cox, which he's been on the team, for a couple seasons now, but he's definitely more of a blocking tight end than a receiving tight end. He's not, your Eric Ebron or your Travis Kelce. Well, that's a bit of a stretch here. But he's more of a blocking tight end. He's not really a receiving tight end per se. He can definitely catch the ball and he can get open, but he's not going to be a dangerous threat in the receiving game. And in my mind, if Paris Campbell doesn't live up to the expectations and Pittman is still just kind of alone out there, the guy that's going to have to step up and start catching passes all the time is going to be Jonathan Taylor. I mean, he's going to be the do-it-all player for this team. He was the rushing title leader last year. He's a dual-threat running back. Taylor's going to have to be the one to step up, and he's going to have to kind of turn into like a Le'Veon Bell, Christian McCaffrey kind of player for the Colts because when you don't have the receiving talent, your running back can be just as good of a receiver as any. They also do have Nyheim Hines still on the roster. He's a lot more of like a third down receiving back, so he can also be a pass catcher, but it's going to be really important for them for these receivers to step up because even though they want Jonathan Taylor to be the focal point of the offense and for them to be a run-first offense, you still have to have a pass game because if you don't have a pass game, then teams are just going to be able to easily key in on you and, game plan for you. We saw that with the Lions back in the 90s. They had this really good run game with Barry Sanders, but that's all they had. They didn't have a passing game whatsoever, and it didn't lead to any success. It led to one playoff win in Barry's whole career, so despite him being the best running back of all time. So definitely going to be important for the Colts to figure that out. Now, the last major topic I have for the Colts here is there's been a lot of stuff going around about the potential of Frank Reich being fired if the Colts, miss the playoffs or don't have a good playoff run here. And in my mind, I'm not sure if that would be the right choice for them. I've got their record down here. They have 2 playoff berths under him. They were 10-6 and they lost in the divisional round in 2018. They did miss the playoffs in each of the years of 2019 and last year, although they should have made it last year had it not been for their disastrous performance. So I'm not so sure. Really only one truly bad season in his 4 years there so far, and that was 2019 when they had Jacoby Brissett at quarterback because Andrew Luck decided to retire. So, I'm not so sure that would be the right decision on the Colts' part to fire him if they don't, make some sort of, if they miss the playoffs, maybe. But the AFC is also really stacked this year, so it's going to be interesting to see what they do with him, because they definitely have potential, for sure. I mean, I've already talked in depth about the offense. I haven't mentioned the defense, but their defense is still really solid. They still have one of the best defenses in my mind in the AFC, led by Shaquille Leonard. He's a all-pro threat every year. He's one of the best linebackers in the league, and he's the leader of this defense, so the pieces are definitely there in place for the Colts to make a playoff run, or at least make it to the playoffs. So the only way in my mind that I could see them justifying firing him is if they had a losing record and missed the playoffs. Which, I mean, they will miss the playoffs if they have a losing record, given how the AFC, how stacked it is this year. So, but if they make the playoffs, then I don't see any reason to fire Frank Reich, because I think, there's a lot of impatience in the league these days, and he has had a lot of time, but, it's just, you got to look at things from a realistic standpoint, and, do you realistically see this team, if they make the playoffs, do you realistically see them competing with the likes of Cincinnati and Buffalo and Kansas City and Los Angeles and, some of these other teams that are going to, in Baltimore, do you really see them competing with them? And I personally don't. I could definitely see them, making the playoffs for sure, but I don't see them really making it further than the wild card round. I envision them as being one of these teams that'll make the playoffs and be like that, first round exit. So I don't know. It's definitely something that's going to be interesting to watch. You know, he's not going to get fired in the middle of the year or anything, unless, of course, they just absolutely tank, which I would be shocked if they did. But it'll be interesting, a storyline to watch once the season is over, if he sticks around or not. So finally, moving on and looking at their schedule, of course, you know, they do have the AFC South, so they get 2 games against the Texans and 2 games against the Jaguars, which, you know, that Week 2 game against the Jaguars is going to be interesting because the Colts just have a knack for losing in Jacksonville for some reason. No matter how bad the Jaguars are, you know, or how good the Colts are, like, they just seem to lose. You know, it's happened the past 2 seasons. You know, they lost. It was a pretty embarrassing loss in Week 1 of the season in 2020, and then they followed it around at the season finale last year and lost with their playoff hopes on the line. So there definitely is that problem there. They do get to draw the NFC East, which is definitely a plus as well. You know, the Commanders and the Giants really aren't that good of teams, so that, you know, those could be wins on the schedule there. You know, the Eagles and Cowboys, of course, are better, but, you know, it's not, you know, you're not drawing like the NFC West or something like that, so drawing the AFC South is definitely a plus. They do draw the drawing the NFC East is definitely a plus. They do draw the AFC West, however, so that is going to be tough, you know, playing the Chiefs, the Broncos, the Raiders, and the Chargers, 4 of the better teams in the AFC, but, you know, these are the teams that you're going to have to beat if the Colts want to have any expectations of going further in the playoffs, so their over-under is set at 9.5 wins this year. So it's a half game less than it was last year. It was set at 10 wins last year. They did finish 9-8, so they did go under. Should have pushed with it, but, you know, that last game of the year. So in my mind, I'm going to say that the Colts do go over the 9.5 wins. I think they'll get 10 wins. I don't think they're going to get much more than that, but I do think they'll get 10 wins. You know, they do, like I said, they have a favorable schedule. They have, you know, 2 games each against the Texans and the Jaguars. They have the NFC East. I definitely see them winning at least 1 game against the Titans this year. I think the Titans are going to regress a little bit. And in my mind, I think the Colts are the favorites to win the AFC South at this point. I think Matt Ryan is just a huge upgrade over Carson Wentz. And, you know, he'll be able to take this team to actually, you know, get back to the top of the division. The Titans definitely really overachieved last year when they became the number 1 seed in the AFC. That was definitely, I think that was a fluke. So I definitely see the Colts as being the favorites to win the AFC South this year and go over the 9.5 wins. So thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you leave down in the comments below whether you agree, disagree with my take on the Indianapolis Colts. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We're getting down towards the end of our NFL previews now. We don't have too many left to go, so make sure you go back and check out the ones that you haven't checked out already, and make sure you stay tuned for the last few teams that we haven't covered, as they will be coming out in the coming weeks. And until then, I will see you guys next time.